27. I think we have it. All right. Exodus 22, 25 through 27, our text this morning, which, for lack of a better title, and since I didn't feel very creative this week, simply more applications of the Eighth Commandment, because that's what it is. It's talking about issues of just lending practices and also with regard to the security of pledge. We kind of talked about that a little bit last week, but it goes into more detail here. So, without further ado, more applications of the Eighth Commandment. Let's look at first just lending practices, which our first verse, Exodus 22, verse 25.
Are we streaming today?
Yeah, I just left it on the computer over there.
Oh, okay.
It's
I just
going.
didn't see. Okay. I'm just checking.
Would you like me to bring that for you?
Sure. Go for it, Mike, please.
If you lend money to any of my people with you who is poor, you shall not be like a money lender to him, and you shall not exact interest from him.
All right. Again, we see God is concerned about the poor and the destitute. This has come up a few times. He has compassion for them. He is concerned for them, and he tells us not to abuse them. It says if you're going to be lending money to the poor, you're not going to be like a money lender to them. Money lenders are basically people who are in charge of professionally giving loans. They're seeking to make a profit on it. They're going to have interest on it. Think of it possibly like a money lending business or maybe a bank giving out loans for whatever purpose. But he says you're supposed to be different. If you're going to be giving a loan to somebody because he needs some money, you are not to exact interest from him if he's poor. Simple as that. Now, God caring about a poor person in such a way is something echoed in other places in the Old Testament. We see it in the book of Proverbs, for example. Whoever multiplies his wealth by interest and profit gathers it for him who is generous to the poor. So the implication is if you're going to be abusing the poor and gaining wealth for yourself by charging them interest, then God is going to take the wealth that you accumulated and he's going to pass it on to someone who's going to be more generous to you. Because God owns everything and he's the one in control of it all. If you think you're going to escape discipline and judgment from God by acting a certain way, you're wrong. Now, we're also probably wise to remind ourselves, since we're talking about the issue of the poor, the issue of helping the poor, taking care of the poor, defining terms is always useful, very helpful. What does it mean to be poor in those days is a question that needs to be asked. What constitutes being poor? It's because we hear this a lot, talking about people needing to take care of the poor. Well, all right. What did it mean to be poor in those days? We have a society that relied heavily on what? Pretty much every person needed to be involved in what kind of a practice in some way, shape, or form. Work. Not just work, but what kind of work?
Do they have cattle?
Well, sure. I mean, you're on the right track. They would have had to have some sort of animals, and they would have to have some means by which to produce food for themselves.
Farmers.
Agriculture. They are all going to have to grow their own food. They have their own animals, and they are going to have to take care of themselves. It's not like they had large, massive farms that you see as you drive by the interstate in the United States, or big supermarkets where you can go and pick up all the food you want. Markets, of course, existed, but something like Kroger was completely unheard of in every category. People needed to take care of that sort of thing. So if you were poor, like when the Bible talks about being poor, what did it mean? It meant that you were at risk of starvation. It means your crops failed. You didn't have food for yourself. That's what poor meant. It meant your animals were possibly dead and gone. Animals that you relied on for transportation. Animals that you relied on to produce milk for you, to be able to plow your field, these kinds of things. You didn't have that anymore. You were in dire straits. You were not going to have what you needed to be able to provide for your family, possibly even to put food in their mouths at all. And what this basically meant is that your life was in danger. It wasn't just an inconvenience. It wasn't just something that you might see these days. I've heard it said. Even from when I was a child, when people would visit this country and see things like supermarkets and see the quote-unquote poor in the United States, people from other lands, like even the poor in the United States, are fat. Well, okay, what do you know that they mean? Even they have plenty of food to eat in the United States are poor. So when we talk about poverty and we talk about those who are poor, we need to look at it as the Bible gives us what poor looks like if we're going to be talking about taking care of the poor. Because when the Bible talks about taking care of the poor, it does so in the context of what it meant by poor. Not what the 21st century American iPhone waiver means by poor. It's like, yeah, you're so poor, you have a supercomputer in your pocket. Yeah, that's poverty, sure it is. In any case, I say this because very frequently when we're out doing gospel ministry, we're talking to or interacting with them online, very often on news media pages. I don't care if it's WTHR, WRTV, whatever it is, you get into any kind of a conversation in one of those things, people tend to fly off the handle and expose their ignorance. But we often will get asked, so what are you doing for the poor then? Telling people about Jesus, so I mean, Jesus cared about the poor, what are you doing for the poor? Like, well, the question that needs to be asked, obviously, is what do you mean by poor? Define that for me. What do you mean by it? Let's know what the Bible means by it. I mean, we're out there, we're giving Bibles away for free after all, so we're charging for it, right? But, so we need to dig deeper. So are we talking about someone who literally has no food? Who has nowhere to live at all? Can't even get a roof over his head in any sense at all? Is this person going to die if I don't do something right now? Because that's what we're talking about here. That's this.
Well, that guy over there didn't get the latest upgrade on his phone.
Terrible.
I know, right? It kills me when you see these people out here panhandling, and while they're panhandling, they're sitting there surfing the web on their iPhone.
You don't look very poor to me. I mean, maybe compared to other people around you, but biblically speaking, you're not.
But those people know where they can get food. I mean,
They
the
do.
homeless, they know.
Sure. All those things. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that we're barred from helping them if we decide we want to. We have a right to do with our property and be generous and kind within whatever what we want. And it's good to do those things. Sure it is. But if you're going to be talking about the absolute requirement to take care of someone who is poor, we need to define poor and how the Bible defines poor. And more than that, you have verses such as these, which also paint an interesting picture. 2 Thessalonians 3, 7 through 10, it reads as follows. For you yourselves know how you ought to imitate us, because we were not idle when we were with you. To be idle, of course, is to be lazy and not to be working. Nor do we eat anyone's bread without paying for it. We're going to eat, we're going to work hard for it, pay you for it. But with toil and labor, we worked night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you. It was not because we do not have that right, but to give you and ourselves an example to imitate. So what's the thing they're supposed to be imitating? Working really hard for the things that you need and working as much as necessary in order to provide for it. Night and day, he said. So for even when we were with you, we would give you this command. If anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. 2 Thessalonians 3:10. So the application from that seems pretty straightforward. If you can work and you refuse to work, then no one should be helping you. Go work. There's work to do. You're able-bodied. You should be working. And there's another question that works into this. Who's the ones supposed to be helping the poor in the first place? This question is important because when we get pushback, much like I've already described, people will complain about our apparent lack of doing things for the poor. But who do they think should be helping the poor? The government. The government should be helping the poor. And of course, that's going to be done through confiscatory taxation policies that are then going to be distributed to other people who didn't earn any of it, who have an entitlement to it. Wait. We didn't just take your bread. We worked hard for what we paid you for it. Worked night and day. That seems to be kind of in conflict with what we read in 2 Thessalonians 3 that we didn't expect. It is. That kind of taxation is socialism. And yes, socialism is theft. Let's be clear. I'm not saying that because some libertarian. I'm saying that because the Bible talks about do not steal and if you are working for your future. Someone is to take away without your consent. That is theft. It doesn't matter if you have a large body to say we're going to give the people who vote for it, pass it for the laws, and we're going to take this away. The government is producing new taxation to some degree. It makes that clear, but the Bible also spells out what the civil government is supposed to be doing. And it's like, I am so reading this. He talks about widows, I think.
That's why she wants to read.
That's good. Go ahead.
You're using that card.
Hey, I got to go brush like that. Give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, they should learn first of all, to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God.
Hold on right there first and foremost. What was supposed to be taking care of the widow who might be in distress? Her children and her grandchildren. Period. Again, family is the widow in need, especially when we're talking about widows in biblical times. We've already talked about this last week. They don't have the support of her husband anymore. She is likely to be in a severely difficult situation. She may well be poor, as the Bible talks about her being poor. And who is supposed to help her? Not the state. Her children and grandchildren are to be taken care of her. Paul says that directly. There's no, you don't have to do any interpretation about that. It's directly stated, yes? And what does Paul say it is? Pleasing in the sight of God.
Well, we see what happens when we abandon that. We see what happens because when we abandon that, and then the state steps in to take over.
It does a terrible job.
And then obviously does a terrible job. There's corruption, wastes everybody's money, drives prices up, all of the above. But also it bloats the government, and it hands power over to them. So all the conservatives out there who are yapping about socialism, why don't we practice the fifth commandment, and then we can talk about how to do away with socialism? You should do both at the same time, but that's the root of the problem is our disobedience to the fifth commandment.
Which leads to disobedience of the eighth commandment.
Yep.
Which brings a bunch of other things down, right?
Yep.
There's people that have no family to take care of them.
That's verse 5.
And which is why we have this quote. Yeah, exactly.
Yep, keep reading, please, Linda.
Well, and then five.
At 5, yes.
The widow who is really in need and left all alone puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and ask God to help for help. But the widow who lives for pleasure is dead even while she lives. Give the people these instructions so that no one may be open to blame. If anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for his immediate family, he has denied faith and is worse than an unbeliever.
Wow. Now, this text also talks about, we have a widow who truly is a widow. They had a list in the churches of people who were widows who had absolutely no support at all, who were destitute and desperate need, and the church did indeed help them. But that was only after these considerations were made. And Paul doubles down on this. You saw that, right? And what he says as a result, if you're not doing this, if you're not taking care of your relatives who are in need, your family, your parents, your grandparents, you're worse than an unbeliever. You've denied the faith. Wow, those are strong words. Yeah, Paul said them. So I'm going to say, you take care of your family. And the family is the safety net for someone who is poor and destitute. That's how it needs to be.
And that is word. When he says they're worse than an unbeliever, that's a dog whistle, right? There is church discipline for those who disobey this, who violate this.
Part of how the church gets involved is to find the family members who aren't taking care of their other family members. And what's wrong with you? We're going to deal with this, and we're going to deal with it now.
But there's also another thing. I don't think we read this part of it. But if you go back into that passage in 1 Timothy, not only does it lay the impetus or the responsibility on those people who are to care for their family members, but it also, when it talks about the church and the supporting widows, it gives requirements for those widows.
Part of those requirements are if they don't have family to take care of them.
Sure.
And a widow who is
Wash the feet of the saints,
Right, who
and not addicted to much
been
wine.
a consistent and obedient Christian woman.
Absolutely. Well, and there
Next verse.
there is the next one. So yeah, you get into that, and it's like, wait a minute, this is a tool of sanctification.
It is.
For both the widow, who needs it every bit as much as the grandchildren and children. Sorry.
No, please, comments are well, certainly. And it helps me keep having to talk quite so much. But in a nutshell, again, those things can be built on, we can continue talking about how the widows are to be supported in churches. But again, the qualifications exist, and what was going to happen before even the church got involved is that family was to be dependent on. So individuals and families are to be taking care of those who are poor. And only churches in extremely desperate situations, the extremely desperate situation being if they didn't have any other support at all. Now, our text this morning even assumes this. What does the text say? It says, notice, if you lend money to any of my people. It does not say, if the judges levy a tax to support any one of our people. The text is consistent. The Bible is consistent with itself. Exodus, the first thing, go figure, right? Now, why I take the time to say all of that? Well, again, we must define things biblically. Absolutely must. If there is some sort of a moral obligation upon us of any sort, I don't care what it is, then God has addressed it in His Word either directly or indirectly, and therefore we need to get our marching orders from the text. So if someone says you need to be doing this, and you're not defining this the way the Bible defines this, then they're not really telling you that you need to be doing it. They're claiming to, but they're not doing it in the way the Scripture does. And then we can simply go back to ask them questions about it. Like, so what do you mean by this? What do you mean by poor? What do you mean by love? What do you mean by hate? What do you mean by oppression? We talked about that last week. Define that for me. You say this is racist. Why? Explain why this is racist. Talk to me about this. Because you're saying that I am. That's like racism is a sin. Let's be clear about that. If you're accusing me of sin, and if you're not framing it in how the Bible talks about partiality and those kinds of things, then you're not doing it properly. And so what are you doing? You're equivocating, and you're committing a Ninth Amendment violation. You're bearing false witness in some way, shape, or form. You're not telling the truth. Now,
And then verse says you have to be over 60.
yeah, there are age requirements too. Because the person who's under 60 was probably expected, actually, what does the text say? The person who was under 60, who was a younger widow, was expected to remarry, and then her new husband was going to help take care of her. That was what was expected to happen. Melinda's not under 60, so.
Have to be under.
I'm just saying, it's still an option.
Then you just have a birthday when they come out. We just talked about this. Anyway, but if you do have someone that you know who is truly in dire straits, and you lend him money, you are not to do it at interest. You're not. The text says don't. Why? Well, why do you think? The obvious answer is the correct answer.
Because God said so.
God said so, that's one. But God said so, and you have to go, well, take it the next step further. What's the guy already in a bad situation about?
Yeah.
Money. He has no money. So you're going to charge him interest? Where is he going to get the money? He didn't have anything. How about, let's frame it this way. Loving your neighbor does not involve utterly destroying him financially. Does that? It does not. If he's already financially ruined, if you're adding further burden on him by putting interest on whatever money you're lending him, you're contributing more to his ruin. That's not loving your neighbor. Right? Pretty easy. Burdening him with interest he cannot afford to pay is not loving your neighbor. God says, don't do it. There we go. Now, a little bit further than that, even if the person were able to pay some interest, though, if he's not destitute of work, if he were a parallel Israelite under the law, he wasn't permitted to charge him interest anyway. I don't look at Deuteronomy 23:19 and 20. Deuteronomy 23:19.
You shall not charge interest on loans to your brother, interest on land, interest on food, interest on anything that is lent with interest. You may charge further interest, that you may not charge your brother interest. That is the Lord your God. That the Lord your God will bless thee. But the Lord your God will bless you in all that you undertake.
If he's one of your brothers, a fellow Israelite, you're not charged with his debt. However, I'm not charged with it. Yeah, we can charge him. One of your own people. he's not destitute poor, but he still wants to borrow some money from you, he agrees to do that personal insurance. Like, all right, I'm trying to do this, because he's not legal. So if it's not, let's look at it. In fact, at the end of the day, especially if the person is really, really poor, it might just be, if you have money to do it, just why not give them that. That problem. We're supposed to favor the body of believers more. Christians are supposed to see favoritism with regard to acts of generosity. Galatians 6:10. All right. Bad opportunity. You have to do good government. But especially, we have an opportunity to do good. There to receive priority there.
We have a responsibility to care for that. It is the priority. All of us, I think we have a place where the household of faith, they receive priority, because we're not. Those are the things that we can do. It's one of the popular ideas, one of the, people, it's not about what we do. Something we very down the road, say, I don't know, well, that's all, just take down that period. Things that it was, let's actually, talk about negative flow. Probably not talking. Don't do that, don't do that. We don't get the story because we don't take to the sun out there. That's the only one. You try to go here by the time. Now we want to do it on at all. Some of them are totally different. So, we think that. Yeah, that's the last day, right? I think Papa looked at the old or the sport. That's the reason. I don't have to do this. But, so it's people are the choice. More difficult to look at it. I have read it. I know it's pretty deep. Well, you talk about how the total is much more expensive than the significant portion of your income in your job. So it's much harder to do. And when it comes to how I'm going to do it, it's probably not that easy. Really, another one point, and that's why when you see like the description and comments about people that are considered to be employees, so they want to start on price and they still all the way high. But they're going to do it well. Right? You need to go about that. Everything you are controlling is not. You might as well put it back up again. Another part of it. And then I'm not really saying you want to know that. But it was a problem, you're right. So, you know, this is a couple of things that are going to be more than what we're going to do. What do you have? What do you need? God cares about you. What happens if you provide for you? What do you got? When those allow me for 3 years to go through it, you don't do it anyway. Secondly, I do believe that we will have. This is why. We're not even happy. Here's how we feel about it. We find it. We don't even look as much as we do the things that we have. It's just an encouragement of the things that we have property. We try to talk about it.
Says the same thing. Okay, poor man, you're not going to sleep this much. Get back. So he can sleep this long. He'll bless you and be righteous before you can obey God. But with regard to the first part, that when you do have a situation where you agree upon the collateral for a loan and he's going to bring you this loan, you don't get to go inside his house to play. You wait outside. You don't violate his home. You respect the man, you respect his property, you respect the God who gave you the man. But private property, God cares about that. It really does. And what is the result? If you do these things, God says it shall be righteous for you from the Lord your God. If you obey God, you're going to be blessed. God blesses obedience. That is the general principle. This is what God set up. This is what He's commanded. That's been used in the law multiple places. But about Israel, but they honor God in this way. But as the prophets is very frequently, when we talk about the prophets, we usually think about honor God. Someone telling us about the future is prophet. Well, the Old Testament prophets did do that, but they spent the vast majority of their time reminding the people of what God said in His law, rebuking them for violations of the covenant. I don't know what the percentage is. I think it's like 70, 30%. It's called the fourth testimony, reminding people of the law of God. Amos chapter 2, verses 6 through 8, we have this. transgressions of Israel and fulfill. I will not revoke the punishment. Meaning, I'm going to judge you and I'm not going to take it back. I'm going to change my mind and judge. Why? Well, here we go. Because they sell the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. Some people in slavery were talking about that already. Those who travel the head of the poor into the dust of the earth and turn aside the way of the wicked. A man and his father go into the same girls, so my holy name is profaned. They lay themselves down beside every altar on garments taken in pledge. And in the house of